At my company's 10th anniversary gala, my husband walked onto the stage holding my best friend's hand and announced that they were engaged. Then he looked directly at me and told 350 employees, investors, reporters, clients, and members of our own family that I would have nothing after the divorce. Everyone waited for me to cry. I did not interrupt them. I did not throw my glass or demand an explanation. I simply walked onto the stage, took the microphone from my husband, and placed it in the hand of my attorney. He opened a thick navy folder and said, "Before we continue, everyone in this room should know who actually owns his company." The smile disappeared from my husband's face. My best friend slowly lowered the hand wearing the 12-carat engagement ring they had purchased with company money. And every camera in the ballroom turned away from me and toward the two people who had mistaken my silence for surrender. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever watched someone take credit for the life you built. Because my husband believed being the face of my company made him its owner, and my best friend believed controlling the story made every lie true. My name is Victoria Hale, and I am 42 years old. For the past 18 years, I have worked in corporate acquisitions and strategic investment. It is a quiet profession requiring patience, discipline, and the ability to see the structure hidden beneath a polished presentation. I spend my days reading contracts, tracing ownership, evaluating risk, and asking the questions charismatic people hope no one will ask. I prefer simple black dresses, private meetings, and decisions supported by documents. My husband was the exact opposite. Adrian was 45 years old and the chief executive officer of Hale Dynamics, the most visible company inside the business group I founded before I married him. Adrian lived for the spotlight. He loved custom tuxedos, magazine profile, luxury cars, standing ovations, and the constant validation of people who only knew the version of him prepared by a public relations team. He was brilliant in front of an audience. He could make an unfinished idea sound revolutionary and make a room full of cautious investors believe they had discovered the future. That talent was one of the reasons I gave him the position. It was also the reason he eventually convinced himself that the company belonged to him. Standing beside Adrian on the gala stage was Lauren Pierce, my best friend of more than 20 years, and the chief communications officer of our group. Lauren had been my maid of honor. She had held my hand at my father's funeral, slept on the floor beside me after I lost a pregnancy, and sat at my kitchen island through every difficult year of my marriage. She knew which memories could break my composure. She knew which insecurities Adrian used when he wanted me to doubt myself. She knew the full history of the company because I had trusted her to help tell it. Then she slowly removed me from that history and placed herself beside my husband. On the night of the gala, Lauren wore a silver gown I had helped her choose 3 weeks earlier. She had told me the color would photograph beautifully against the midnight blue stage. I believed she was preparing to host the celebration. She was actually choosing the dress she planned to wear while announcing that she had taken my husband, my public identity, and what she believed was my company. Adrian wore a midnight tuxedo and the confident smile of a man who thought every important person in my life had already accepted his version of events. He received an award titled Visionary Founder of the Decade. Even though he had joined the company 4 years after I created its parent organization, Lauren had arranged the award, written the introduction, approved the press language, and instructed the video team to keep my name out of the founder montage. I knew all of that before the lights came on. I also knew about the hotel rooms, the secret apartment, the company they had created together, the client files they planned to steal, the employees they intended to recruit, and the settlement Adrian expected me to sign after the gala. I knew the engagement ring on Lauren's hand had been charged to a corporate account as a strategic client retention expense. I knew Adrian had promised his mother non-existent shares. I knew Lauren had drafted a press statement describing me as an exhausted minority investor who had voluntarily stepped away from leadership. Most importantly, I knew they planned to use my emotional reaction as the final piece of evidence that I was too unstable to remain involved in the business. That was why I let them speak. Adrian stood beneath 1,000 crystal lights, lifted Lauren's hand, and told the room, "For years, I have lived inside a marriage that no longer understood me. Lauren gave me the courage to choose the life I deserve." The ballroom became completely silent. Lauren leaned into him, displaying the ring. Adrian continued, "Victoria and I are divorcing. Once the settlement is complete, she will have no role in Hale Dynamics and no claim over what Lauren and I built." A few cameras turned toward me. Lauren had specifically instructed the production team to capture my reaction. She expected tears. Adrian expected rage. Their attorney expected me to storm onto the stage and make a statement that could be edited into proof of instability. Instead, I looked at the digital clock above the production booth and waited until it reached 9:17 p.m. That was the time our board resolution became enforceable. I turned to the audio director and said, "Keep every microphone live." Adrian's smile shifted. Lauren looked toward the control booth. I walked onto the stage slowly. No dramatic music followed me. I wore a simple black silk gown and the small gold watch my father gave me when I completed my first acquisition. Adrian held the microphone away from me. "Victoria," he said in the soft warning voice he used when he wanted witnesses to believe I was difficult. "This is not the time to create a scene." I looked at him. "You chose the time. Adrian. You invited the audience." Then I took the microphone. I could see Lauren preparing to step between us. I could see Adrian's mother smiling from the front table, already imagining the wealth her son had promised her. I could see investors studying my face and reporters waiting for the collapse Lauren had guaranteed them. I did not give them one. Adrian has spent 10 years telling the world that leadership means knowing when to delegate. I said, "Tonight, I am going to follow his advice." I turned and handed the microphone to my attorney, David Sinclair. David stepped into the light carrying the navy folder that contained our ownership chart, the board resolutions, the patent records, the forensic audit, and the first documents in what would become a federal investigation. He opened the folder slowly and looked directly at Adrian. "Before we continue," he said, "everyone in this room should know who actually owns Hale Dynamics." The blood drained from Adrian's face. Lauren stopped smiling. The room that had been prepared for my public humiliation became perfectly still. My husband thought the gala would introduce the world to his new fiancée. My best friend thought it would erase me from the company I created. Neither of them understood that I had invited every director, lawyer, auditor, investigator, and reporter necessary to witness their confession. To understand how two people I trusted most reached that stage, believing they could take my marriage, my company, and my name in a single evening. We have to go back 4 months to the presentation Lauren accidentally sent to the wrong email address. The message arrived at 11:43 on a rainy Monday night. I was sitting alone in the library of our penthouse, reviewing acquisition reports while Adrian slept in the guest suite. He had told me he needed space because my constant seriousness made it impossible for him to rest. Lauren had spent the entire afternoon assuring me that his distance was temporary. "He is under pressure," she had said. "The product launch, the investors, the anniversary gala. He needs to feel admired. Victoria, you solve problems for him so quickly that sometimes he feels small." I remember staring at her across my kitchen island, wondering how my best friend had become the translator for my own husband. Lauren and I met during our first week at Northwestern. I was the scholarship student who color-coded every syllabus. She was the fearless communications major who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with invitations to 3 parties. She stood beside me when my father died. She slept on the floor of my first apartment after I lost a pregnancy. She was the maid of honor at my wedding. She knew the names of the children I once imagined having. She knew which songs made me cry and which memories I avoided after midnight. Adrian betrayed my marriage. Lauren used my grief as market research. But that night, I did not know any of that yet. I only knew she had sent me a file titled HD10 Gala Master Final V6. I assumed it was the final production deck for Hale Dynamics' 10th anniversary gala. I opened it because I was the chair of the parent company, and every major public statement required my review. The first 20 slides were exactly what I expected: growth statistics, employee awards, product footage, charitable commitments, and a dramatic timeline presenting Adrian as the visionary architect of the company. My own name appeared once in small type beneath a photograph from the first year, initial capital partner. It was inaccurate, but not unusual. Lauren had spent years sanding me out of the public story. She always said investors responded better to a single heroic founder than to complicated ownership structures. I had allowed it because I did not need applause. I cared about voting control, cash flow, patents, contracts, and whether our employees could make payroll. Adrian cared about magazine covers. Lauren cared about controlling the sentence beneath the photograph. We divided the work. And for a long time I mistook that division for trust. I was about to close the file when I noticed a yellow comment icon near slide 32. I clicked it. A sidebar opened with Lauren's initials beside a note: Adrian proposes here. Pause for cameras. Get Victoria reaction shot before security moves her. I read the comment twice. Then I scrolled. The next slide was hidden from presentation view. It contained a photograph of Adrian and Lauren standing on a beach in the Maldives. His mouth against her temple, her left hand resting on his chest. Beneath it was a draft headline: Hale Dynamics founder and chief brand officer announce engagement and new leadership era. Another comment read, "Once V signs settlement. Release board statement immediately. Do not let her address press. Transition to health and family reasons." My hands did not shake. That surprised me. I had imagined betrayal as something loud. A physical rupture. A moment when the body rebelled against reality. Instead, the room became very still. The rain tapped the windows. The old clock on the mantel clicked forward. I felt my marriage end with the quiet precision of a lock turning. I opened the file information panel and reviewed the version history. Lauren had forgotten that our corporate platform retained every prior draft. There were 38 versions. I downloaded them all. In version 29, Adrian's proposal speech described me as a valued early supporter who has chosen to step away. In version 26, Lauren had written a press strategy titled Managing Victoria's Emotional Response. It included suggested language for anonymous sources: exhausted, isolated, controlling, jealous of Adrian's success, increasingly erratic. Version 22 contained a seating plan that placed 2 crisis communications consultants near me and 4 security officers near the stage. Version 18 included a private schedule after the Gala 9:25 p.m. Council presents settlement agreement backstage. 9:37 p.m. Board ratifies leadership transition. 9:47 p.m. Press release goes live. 10:00 Adrian and Lauren depart through East Entrance. At the bottom of the document was a sentence that changed the story from adultery to conspiracy. Once Victoria signs, transfer brand license and client contracts to Astorvale before midnight. I had never heard of Astorvale. I searched our corporate registry database. A company with that name had been formed 6 weeks earlier in Delaware. Its managers were listed through a registered agent, but the mailing address matched a luxury condominium in Manhattan leased by Hale Dynamics as an executive hospitality property. I knew that address. Adrian had told me the condominium was being used for international clients. I opened the building access records. His key card had entered the unit 43 times in the last 4 months. Lauren's had entered 39 times. My stomach tightened. But I did not close the file. I searched deeper. Astorvale had filed trademark applications for a name disturbingly similar to our premium product line. It had approached 3 of our senior engineers. It had circulated draft employment agreements using compensation data that only our executive team could access. Someone was preparing to remove the profitable core of Hale Dynamics, leave the debt behind, and launch a new company under Adrian and Lauren's control. The affair was not separate from the business plan. The affair was the business plan. I saved every document to an encrypted drive. Then I opened a new case folder and named it Glass House. I did not call Adrian. I did not wake him. I did not send Lauren a message asking how she could sit at my table while planning my humiliation. I called David Sinclair, outside counsel to Hale Group Holdings, and the man who helped me build the structure Adrian had never bothered to understand. David answered on the 3rd ring. Victoria. His voice was rough with sleep. Is someone hurt? Not yet. I said, but I need you to preserve a file before 2 people realize they sent it to me. 20 minutes later, David was logged into the system through a secure legal hold. B10A? M. The presentation. Commence. Version history. Access logs. And associated emails were preserved in a form that could survive litigation. Atunu 17. I called Priya Nanda Kumar, the independent chair of our audit committee. Atunu 13 Shinoa. We added our chief information security officer, Adoy Chinch. The 3 of us watched a screen recording showing Lauren delete the original message from her sent folder and upload a revised deck without comments. Adoy unsprezece. Adrian entered the library wearing a robe and annoyance. Why are you still awake? He asked. I minimized the secure window and looked at him. He was handsome, in the polished, deliberate way that had once made rooms feel brighter when he entered. At 45. Adrian still carried himself like the young salesman I met at a regional technology conference 15 years earlier. Back then he had 1 suit, a rented car, and an ability to make every person in a room believe he had been waiting specifically to meet them. I had just founded Hale Group Holdings with money from the sale of my first software licensing company. He sold enterprise systems for someone else. I understood products, capital, and risk. He understood attention. We fell in love quickly. 2 years later, I acquired a failing consumer electronics firm with exceptional engineers and terrible leadership. I renamed it Hale Dynamics and asked Adrian to lead sales. He doubled revenue in 18 months. I made him president, then CEO. Reporters started calling him the founder. He corrected them the first few times. Then he stopped. Eventually, he began telling the story himself. I was reviewing the Gala materials. That's as in Marielzadin, Netzatalder. I said. Adrian leaned against the doorframe. Lauren has that handled. Apparently. He studied my face. What does that mean? It means I am tired. He relaxed. You work too much. He crossed the room, kissed the top of my head, and glanced at the minimized screen. You should let people who understand presentation handle the public side. Not everything needs your fingerprints on it. You are right. I said. Not everything does. He smiled, believing he had won a small argument. Then he returned to the guest suite where he had been sleeping because he claimed my presence made him feel judged. I sat in the dark for another hour and reviewed every moment of our marriage through a new lens. The unexplained trips, the private dinners Lauren insisted were necessary for Adrian's morale. The way she encouraged me to skip events because mystery protects authority. The way Adrian had begun referring to Hale Dynamics as my company in private when something went wrong and his company in public when something went right. The jokes about my inability to understand branding, the interviews that omitted my role, the board dinners where Lauren seated me at the far end so photographers could frame Adrian alone. They had not erased me all at once. They had removed me one caption at a time. The next morning, I behaved exactly as they expected. I made coffee. I asked Adrian whether he had slept well. I reminded him of a client call. I texted Lauren that I loved the general direction of the gala deck and had only minor notes. She replied with 3 heart emojis and wrote, "You are the best. Adrian is lucky you never make things difficult." That sentence became the first exhibit in a private education neither of them knew they were receiving. By noon, David had assembled a small legal team under attorney-client privilege. Priya initiated a confidential audit review. Our information security officer began mirroring executive accounts without changing access. We did not search for adultery. A board could not remove a chief executive merely because he was a terrible husband. We searched for misuse of assets, conflicts of interest, theft of intellectual property, misleading statements to investors, diversion of corporate opportunities, and violations of fiduciary duty. We found all of them. The first evidence came from expenses. Lauren had coded the engagement ring as a prototype gemstone interface for premium wearable research. The Maldives trip appeared as Asia-Pacific Distributor Summit. The condominium was categorized as client hospitality, although no client had ever stayed there. A custom wardrobe for Lauren had been billed to Gala production. Private dinners were listed as analyst relations. The total misuse over 14 months exceeded $600,000. Adrian had approved every reimbursement. Lauren had submitted most of them. The second layer was more serious. Astorvale had downloaded confidential design files through Lauren's administrative credentials. Adrian had emailed client revenue projections to a personal account. 2 engineers received offers containing our unreleased compensation bands. A draft investor deck claimed Astorvale owned technology that belonged to Hale Group's patent trust. One slide described a licensing transfer that had never been approved. Another listed Adrian as founder and controlling shareholder of Hale Dynamics. A statement that was not merely arrogant. It was false in a document prepared for potential investors and accrued. The third layer was personal. We found the settlement agreement. Adrian planned to give me backstage at the gala. He had told me weeks earlier that his attorney wanted us to update marital privacy protections because journalists were becoming aggressive. The document was presented as a mutual confidentiality agreement. It was actually a separation proposal with embedded corporate waivers. It stated that I acknowledged Adrian as the sole creator of Hale Dynamics, waived the right to challenge transfers made in the ordinary course of business, agreed not to contact employees or investors for 6 months, and accepted a fixed payment in exchange for releasing any claim to his entrepreneurial holdings. The arrogance would have been almost funny if the intent had not been so clear. Adrian believed I was a passive spouse holding a decorative title. He had never studied the structure created before our marriage. Hale Group Holdings owned 82% of Hale Dynamics. I owned 68% of the voting shares of Hale Group. The remaining voting interests were held by an employee trust, 2 early investors, and a charitable foundation. Adrian owned 8% of Hale Dynamics outright. Another 12% existed as unvested options tied to performance, compliance, and fiduciary obligations. The patents, trademarks, and core software did not belong to Hale Dynamics at all. They were licensed from a separate intellectual property trust I controlled. Adrian had the title. I had the votes. Lauren had the story. Neither of them had the company. 3 days after I received the gala deck, Lauren came to my office carrying white roses. "You have been quiet," she said, placing them on my conference table. "Are you okay?" She wore a cream suit and the pearl earrings I gave her on her 40th birthday. I looked at the woman who knew where my father's ashes were scattered and wondered how long she had been rehearsing concern while sleeping with my husband. I am tired. I said, Adrian says, you have been distant. Adrian has been distant. Lauren Sihil and sat beside me. Marriage changes. Successful men can become lonely when they feel their wives see them as projects. Is that what he told you? Her eyes held mine for half a second too long. He tells me things because I manage his public pressure. That is my job. And what do you tell him that you love him? That you built all of this together? That he should be patient with you. Her voice softened. Victoria. I know you hate public emotion. But the gala could be a chance to show him you still support him. Let him have the spotlight. Do not correct every detail. Do not make the evening about ownership documents and technical history. There it was. She needed me quiet. She needed me cooperative. She needed me sitting in the front row while they used my stage to announce my replacement. I reached for her hand. She looked relieved. You have always known what is best for the room. I said, plan the evening you think Adrian deserves. Lauren smiled. I knew you would understand. I did understand. I understood that she interpreted access as entitlement. I understood that every private wound I had trusted her with had become a line in a crisis strategy. And I understood that firing her that day would save her from revealing the full extent of what she had done. So I let her continue. Over the next month, Adrian and Lauren became bolder. They held meetings without me. They circulated a draft leadership chart placing Lauren beside Adrian as Chief Strategy and Brand Officer. They contacted investors about continuity after Victoria's planned withdrawal. They scheduled a board vote for the night of the gala. Assuming public momentum would force approval, Adrian began speaking to me with exaggerated gentleness. The tone people use when they want witnesses to believe the other person is fragile. At breakfast, he asked whether I remembered conversations that had never happened. At dinner, he suggested I reduce my workload because I seemed confused. In front of staff, he offered to handle decisions so I could focus on wellness. Lauren repeated the same language in emails. Their goal was not to prove I lacked legal capacity. They only needed enough public doubt to make my objections look emotional. They planned to introduce betrayal and business restructuring in the same moment, then frame any resistance as a jealous wife sabotaging the company. They mistook my refusal to perform pain for an inability to recognize strategy. One Friday evening, Adrian brought home a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. I want peace, he said. We sat in the living room overlooking the river. He handed me a slim folder. Our attorneys recommend a marital privacy agreement before the gala. There will be press. We should protect each other. I opened the document. It was the same settlement David had already reviewed, now disguised beneath a new cover page. Do I need independent counsel? I asked. Adrian laughed softly. For a confidentiality agreement, that seems hostile. You have counsel. Corporate counsel drafted it. That was another lie. His private attorney had prepared it. I will read it this weekend. His jaw tightened. Victoria. Not everything needs weeks of analysis. Then it should be easy to understand. He leaned back. This is exactly the problem. You make trust feel like due diligence. Trust survives due diligence. His smile disappeared. For a moment, the man beneath the charm looked directly at me. Do not embarrass me at the gala. Why would I? Because you sometimes forget people are watching. I never forget that. I said. He left the folder on the table. After he went upstairs, I photographed the entire document, placed it back exactly where he had left it, and sent the images to David. The next morning, I told Adrian I would sign after the anniversary presentation. He looked so pleased that I almost felt pity. Almost. The confidential audit expanded. We discovered that Lauren had edited corporate biographies to remove my founding role. She instructed an outside public relations firm to describe me as a legacy capital partner. She drafted anonymous quotes claiming I was disengaged and difficult, She scheduled interviews for herself and Adrian in the week after the gala. She arranged photographs in the condominium, Entverliebeling, and a condominium. She even prepared a feature titled The Couple Who Built the Future Together. In the notes, she wrote, "Avoid timeline questions before 2014. That was the year Hale Dynamics launched. Adrian and Lauren had known each other for less than a decade. I had founded the holding company 3 years before I married him and acquired the business with my own capital. Their story required the public to forget facts that existed in signed agreements. Bank records, patte registration, and board minutes. Lauren believed repetition could replace truth. She was a brilliant communicator. She should have known repetition only works when no one controls the archive. The hardest discovery was not financial. It was a folder in Lauren's cloud account titled V Notes. Inside were years of private messages I had sent her. My fears after the miscarriage. My worries that Adrian no longer desired me. My guilt about choosing work during my father's final months. My confession that I sometimes felt invisible beside the man I had elevated. Lauren had organized the messages by theme: emotional instability, jealousy, control issues, work obsession, family trauma. She used my most vulnerable words to build the profile they intended to hand reporters after the gala. At the bottom of the folder was a voice recording from 6 months earlier. I heard myself crying in her kitchen. I do not know how to reach him anymore. I had said. Lauren's voice answered. Warm and patient. Give him space. Let me talk to him. 2 hours after that recording, building access logs showed Lauren entering the condominium where Adrian was waiting. I paused the audio and closed my eyes. Losing Adrian ended a marriage. Discovering that folder forced me to question every version of myself I had trusted Lauren to remember. For 1 full minute, I allowed myself to feel it. Then, I copied the folder into the legal archive and returned to work. Pain could be honored later. Evidence had deadlines. The file also forced me to revisit how the 3 of us had arrived there. Hale Dynamics had not begun with betrayal. It began with a warehouse in New Jersey that smelled like dust, hot wiring, and rain leaking through a damaged roof. The company was called Meridian Home Systems then. It had developed a beautiful adaptive control panel, but burned through cash under a founder who believed engineering excellence made customers appear automatically. I saw the product during a receivership auction. Adrian saw a dead company. Lauren saw an ugly brand. I saw 46 employees whose work deserved a second chance. I used proceeds from my first software sale to acquire the assets through Hale Group. The first year, I took no salary. Adrian joined 6 weeks later as head of commercial development. Lauren was freelancing for 3 nonprofit campaigns and agreed to rewrite our website in exchange for a small retainer and a desk near the window. We worked 16-hour days. Adrian drove samples to buyers because delivery services were too expensive. Lauren photographed products on white bedsheets taped to a warehouse wall. I negotiated with lenders who assumed a 31-year-old woman asking to purchase a failed electronics business had inherited money and lost perspective. When the first national retailer agreed to carry our controls, all 3 of us slept in the office because the manufacturing schedule was collapsing. Those memories were not invented. Adrian was talented. Lauren was loyal then. Or seemed to be. That truth complicated everything. It would have been easier to believe they had always been monsters. They had not. They became people who treated contribution as permission to take what did not belong to them. The first public profile appeared in a regional business magazine 2 years after the acquisition. The reporter photographed Adrian on the factory floor because he was charismatic and available. I was in a bank meeting securing the line of credit that kept production operating. Lauren called me and asked whether the article could identify Adrian as co-founder. I said no. The company had been acquired, not founded by us. And the holding structure mattered. She changed it to the executive who rebuilt Meridian into Hale Dynamics. That was accurate enough. The article attracted customers, Adrian framed the cover. A year later, another journalist called him founder. He laughed and corrected the reporter during the interview. Lauren later told him the correction made the story confusing. People need a human origin. She said, "Victoria is the ownership origin. You are the emotional origin." I remember smiling because it sounded like harmless branding language. The next profile called him visionary founder. This time he did not correct it. I noticed. He kissed me that evening and said, "Everyone inside the company knows the truth." The sentence was a small door. I walked through it because payroll was due and a supplier had failed. 5 years later, almost no one inside the company knew. Lauren controlled orientation materials, executive biographies, anniversary videos, and media archives. The acquisition became a sentence about Adrian rescuing an overlooked idea. My capital became early support. The patent trust disappeared from public descriptions. When I questioned the simplification, Lauren told me that public recognition made me uncomfortable and she was respecting my privacy. That was partly true. She used my preferences as a tool to enlarge him. Adrian's transformation was gradual enough to excuse. He began expecting private aircraft because travel time affected leadership. He began treating designers as people who executed his intuition. He stopped attending the weekly operational review, but repeated Elena's insights during interviews. When a launch succeeded, he spoke about courage. When it failed, he asked why I had not intervened. At home, he complained that I discussed risk instead of celebrating possibility. I responded by removing more stress from his life. I handled refinancing. I resolved litigation. I used my relationships to bring in directors who could challenge us. Each solution made him appear stronger while making my work less visible. Lauren praised me for being secure enough to let him shine. Security became the word they used whenever they wanted me to disappear willingly. There had been warning signs in the friendship, too. At our 10th wedding anniversary, Lauren prepared a video of Adrian's career. She included photographs from our wedding, but cropped me from 2 of them because the composition was cleaner. I joked about it. She said, "You hate being photographed anyway." When an interviewer asked how Adrian balanced marriage and leadership, Lauren supplied a quote describing me as a private, stabilizing influence. I asked why she never described me as chair of the company that employed him. She laughed and said titles were not romantic. Once, after a charity dinner, I overheard Adrian tell a donor that Lauren was the reason the brand had a soul. He saw me and added, "Victoria is the reason it has a balance sheet." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. The joke reduced us both to functions, but only one function received love. The affair likely began during the European product tour 14 months before the gala. Adrian had wanted me to attend. Lauren encouraged me to stay home for an acquisition closing. He needs the freedom to be spontaneous with press. She said, "You will spend the entire trip correcting his numbers." I agreed because the acquisition mattered. Photographs from the tour showed them standing closer each day. Separate rooms appeared on the itinerary, but access logs later showed Lauren's key used at Adrian's suite after midnight. When he returned, he was unusually affectionate for 1 week, then distant. Lauren brought me a scarf from Paris. I wore it to dinner with both of them. Remembering that dinner later felt like remembering myself through glass. They had shared a secret across my table while I thanked them for thinking of me. 3 months later, I suffered a minor health scare caused by exhaustion. Nothing serious. But my doctor ordered rest. Lauren took over executive communications, and Adrian insisted I spend 2 weeks at a wellness retreat. During those 2 weeks, they removed my approval requirement from several routine publicity workflows. The change was described as temporary. It never fully returned. Lauren began telling reporters I was stepping back. Adrian began telling directors he was carrying both the commercial and strategic burden. I came home healthier and found my absence had been converted into a narrative. Rather than challenge it, I focused on the holding company. That decision was rational, operationally, and disastrous personally. It gave them a stage without supervision. But responsibility must remain correctly placed. My failure to monitor did not authorize theft. My preference for privacy did not authorize erasure. My trust did not become a transferable asset simply because they learned how to exploit it. One of the most painful discoveries in Lauren's V Notes folder was a document titled Pressure Points. It listed moments she believed would make me surrender quickly. Public accusations about being emotionally cold, references to infertility, claims that I had inherited success instead of earning it, suggestions that employees feared me. The list was built from years of conversations. Beside each item, she rated probable reaction: withdrawal, silence, anger, tears. She predicted that if Adrian announced the affair in front of employees, I would leave rather than create a scene. She knew me well. Under ordinary circumstances, she would have been correct. Their plan depended on converting my dignity into compliance. That realization changed the way I prepared. I did not need to become loud. I needed to make leaving unnecessary. I needed the documents. Board, production feed, security, and legal authority positioned so the truth could remain in the room, even if I said very little. During the confidential investigation, I met separately with Elena Ruiz. Elena had served as chief operating officer for 4 years. Adrian respected her in private and diminished her in public. I could not explain the affair or full legal strategy. But I asked whether operations could survive an abrupt executive transition. She studied me. Is this hypothetical? No. She did not ask for gossip. She opened a notebook. We need client assurance scripts, supplier authority, treasury approvals, employee communication, and a decision on the product launch. If access is revoked, security must know which integrations depend on his personal tokens. That was leadership. No performance. No demand to be reassured. We worked for 3 hours. At the end, Elena said, "People think Adrian makes fast decisions. Most of the time, he announces decisions other people spent weeks preparing." I know. Do they know you know they are about to? She closed the notebook. Then make sure the company is standing after the announcement. That sentence shaped my response at the gala. I could expose them and still fail if employees lost jobs. Clients panicked, or products collapsed. Revenge measured only by an enemy's loss is irresponsible when innocent people share the structure. Every action required a continuity plan. We increased liquidity quietly. We obtained backup signatures on critical vendor agreements. We moved the product launch decision to a committee. We prepared customer letters that did not reveal private details. We created an employee assistance line. We briefed insurance carriers. By the night of the gala, the company was safer without Adrian than it had been with him. He interpreted the calm around him as proof that no one suspected anything. In reality, calm was the evidence that hundreds of contingencies had already been considered. Lauren noticed small changes. 2 weeks before the gala, she asked why Elena had been added to the main client dinner. I said succession planning. She asked why David attended production meetings. I said sponsor compliance. She asked why the audit committee requested raw expense data. I said year-end controls. Each answer was true and incomplete. She searched my face for betrayal because she understood concealment. She found none because I was no longer trying to deceive her emotionally. I had accepted what she was. Once acceptance arrived, performance became unnecessary. I spoke to her as I would speak to any officer under investigation, politely, precisely, and without giving away confidential process. She mistook professionalism for blindness. Adrian's confidence came from a different source. He believed love made me predictable. He knew I disliked scandal. He knew I protected employees and hated destabilizing markets. He believed those values trapped me. What he never understood was that values are not chains when they are applied with boundaries. I could protect the company without protecting him. I could preserve employees without preserving his title. I could honor the years we built together without allowing him to steal the result. The distinction was simple once I stopped confusing mercy with access. By the end of the second week, David had enough evidence to recommend immediate termination. Priya had enough to call an emergency board meeting. Our security team had enough to lock every executive account before Adrian finished a sentence. I stopped them. Not yet, I said. Priya stared at me across the secure conference room. Victoria. They are soliciting employees. We can suspend him today. If we suspend him today, he says the board panicked because of a marital dispute. Lauren says, I fabricated the business allegations after discovering the affair. Investors see a private war and choose sides. David folded his hands. What do you want? I looked at the gala schedule projected on the wall. I want them to say it themselves. Adrian and Lauren had designed the evening to force me into a public reaction. They had invited every person whose belief mattered: directors, lenders, clients, analysts, journalists, and investors they hoped would finance Astorvale. They intended to use the room as proof that they controlled Hale Dynamics. I decided the room would become proof that they knew exactly what they were doing. We built a response around their own timetable. Priya arranged for the independent directors to attend a closed session before the gala without notifying Adrian. David prepared resolutions to suspend him. Terminate Lauren. Revoke unvested options. Preserve devices. And authorize litigation. Our intellectual property counsel drafted notices ending Astorvale's unauthorized use of trademarks and technology. Cybersecurity created a mirrored environment that would allow Adrian and Lauren to believe they still had access while recording every download. Deletion. And transfer. The audit team traced the corporate money used for their affair, and the new company, Human Resources, secured the employee solicitation evidence. Outside, investigators verified the condominium, travel, an undisclosed relationship. Nothing depended on gossip. Nothing depended on whether a judge believed I was hurt. We built the case from records created by the people who believed records belonged to them. I also met with my divorce attorney, Naomi Chen. She placed our prenuptial agreement on the table and looked at me over her glasses. Adrian insisted on this. Correct, his mother did. I said. She believed he would become wealthy and I would take half. Naomi turned to the section governing separate property. The holding company, patent trust, and all appreciation tied to premarital assets remain yours. His vested 8% in Hale Dynamics is marital only to the extent specified in the schedule. Unvested options disappear if the board finds cause. Corporate theft is not marital property. Restitution will be deducted from any settlement. The agreement is not as romantic as he imagined. But it is clear. Can he challenge it? Anyone can challenge anything. Winning is different. She tapped another clause. He also waived spousal support if terminated for fraud involving your separate business. His lawyer drafted that language. I remembered Adrian signing the agreement 2 weeks before our wedding. He had smiled while telling me it protected ambition. We should never punish the successful spouse for working harder, he said. At the time, I thought the sentence was ugly but harmless. Now it waited, like a door he had locked from the wrong side. Do not tell him yet, I said. Naomi nodded. You want him confident. I want him honest. Confidence was simply the condition under which Adrian told the truth. The gala approached. Hale Dynamics' 10th anniversary was supposed to celebrate the employees who took a failing electronics company and turned it into a global design brand. We had reserved the Grand Meridian Ballroom, a vast room of glass, stale, and suspended crystal. Lauren controlled every visual element. She chose silver and midnight blue, Adrian's favorite colors. She commissioned a 40-foot video wall. She placed his portrait in the center of the company timeline and reduced mine to a small photograph near the registration table. She selected an award called Visionary Founder of the Decade and arranged for a retired senator to present it. She ordered custom champagne bottles bearing Adrian's signature. She designed a press wall that read, "Hail, the next era." When I approved the budget, she sent me a message. "Thank you for trusting me with the most important night of our lives." I stared at the plural pronoun, our lives. She no longer bothered to hide the emotional ownership she felt over the event. I replied, "Make it unforgettable." She did not recognize the warning because people rarely hear danger in the language they most want to believe. 3 weeks before the gala, Adrian's mother, Margaret, invited me to lunch at the Legacy Club. She had spent our entire marriage treating wealth as a moral quality. Margaret came from a family with a recognizable name and very little remaining money. When Adrian and I married, she told her friends, I was promising but unpolished. After Hale Dynamics became successful, she rewrote history and claimed her son had rescued my modest investment from obscurity. She arrived wearing cream wool and a brooch that once belonged to her grandmother. "You look tired," she said, before the waiter poured water. "I have been working." That is exactly what I mean. She studied me with practiced sympathy. A woman can become so committed to proving herself that she forgets what a marriage requires. "Did Adrian ask you to speak to me?" Adrian does not need to ask. A mother notices. She opened her menu without reading it. He is entering a different stage of life. The company needs a couple who can represent optimism and modern leadership. You have always preferred numbers and contracts. There is no shame in admitting someone else may be better suited to stand beside him. Someone else. Margaret's eyes flickered. Lauren is excellent with people. Lauren is my friend. Of course. That is why she understands how delicate this is. She leaned closer. "Victoria, take the settlement. Keep your dignity. Adrian is willing to be generous. Do not force him to describe publicly how difficult the marriage has become." For a moment, grief threatened to break through my preparation. Margaret knew. She had sat across from me at holidays, accepted vacations paid by my company, worn jewelry I purchased, and watched her son build a second life with my best friend. "How generous?" I asked. Relief softened her face. She believed I was negotiating surrender, a residence, a substantial cash payment, and freedom from the burden of corporate leadership. Adrian will keep Hale Dynamics. Lauren will help stabilize the transition. Everyone wins. And what do you receive? Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I do not know what you mean. Adrian promised you shares. Color rose beneath her makeup. My son would naturally provide for his family. How many? That is private. 10% of Astorvale. Her eyes widened. I had found the draft allocation in Adrian's personal notes: 15% for himself, 12% for Lauren, 10% for Margaret. The remainder reserved for investors and employees they plan to recruit from us. Margaret placed her fork down. You have been snooping. I asked a question. This suspicious behavior is why Adrian cannot live with you. You treat family like an audit. Family that survives an audit has nothing to fear. She gathered her handbag. Do not make the mistake of believing your name on old paperwork means the company will choose you. People follow Adrian. Then he has nothing to worry about. Margaret stood. You will regret humiliating him. I have no intention of humiliating Adrian. I said, I intend to let him explain himself. She left without eating. That afternoon, she called Lauren. The call was made from a company-issued phone, subject to monitoring for security purposes. Lauren assured her that I knew nothing and was merely performing one of her control rituals. Adrian laughed in the background. "Let her review old documents," he said. "By the time she understands the new structure, it will be public." The recording gave us another participant with knowledge of the plan, but I instructed legal not to overreach. Margaret's greed was not the center of the case. Adrian and Lauren were responsible for their own choices. I would not turn the story into a family feud when the evidence showed corporate misconduct. Still, I invited Margaret to the gala and seated her in the front row. She deserved a clear view of the fortune her son had promised her. At home, Adrian became almost tender. He brought flowers. He suggested we renew our vows privately after the gala. He spoke about a vacation in Tuscany. The affection did not confuse me. It clarified the cruelty. He needed me calm enough to sign. He needed the audience to see a gracious husband push toward a new love by a distant wife. He practiced concern like an actor rehearsing a role. One night, he found me looking through our wedding album. I had taken it from the shelf because the legal team requested photographs proving Lauren's long personal access to our family. Adrian sat beside me. "We were happy," he said. "Were we?" He touched a photograph of Lauren adjusting my veil. "People change." "When did you?" He looked at me sharply. "What is that supposed to mean?" "You said people change." He relaxed when he saw no accusation in my face. "Success changes the scale of a life. Some people grow with it. Some hold on to old versions of themselves. Which one am I?" "You are brilliant, Victoria. But you build walls. You make love feel like a board meeting." And Lauren, his expression became carefully neutral. Lauren understands human emotion. I turned a page. There we were at the launch of Hale Dynamics Me, in a navy suit. Adrian beside the prototype. Lauren holding a clipboard behind us. "She certainly understands presentation," I said. Adrian closed the album. "At the gala, I need you to trust me. No corrections from the audience. No impromptu speeches. No discussion of holding companies. Let people celebrate what we built." "What you built," he smiled as if correcting a child. "What we built?" Obviously. The pronoun arrived only when he needed my cooperation. "I will not interrupt you." I promised. That was true. I intended to let him finish every sentence. The next morning, Lauren sent me wardrobe options. She recommended a pale gray gown with a high neckline and no jewelry. Elegant. Quiet. Supportive. She wrote. For herself. She selected silver sequins and a plunging back. I approved her dress. Then I chose black. Not mourning. Clarity. I wanted no one to mistake me for part of their visual campaign. As the final week began, Astorvale accelerated its theft. Adrian sent a draft agreement to a private equity fund promising exclusive access to our newest adaptive interface. The technology belonged to the patent trust. The agreement included a representation that Adrian possessed authority to transfer it. The prospective investor, not realizing the conflict, accepted an invitation to the gala and expected Adrian to announce the deal on stage. That was the declaration David needed. Private discussions could be reframed as exploration. A public announcement to investors established intent. We contacted the fund's counsel under privilege and informed them that ownership was disputed. They agreed to attend, preserve communications, and make no commitment. Adrian believed their presence meant he had secured financing. He began walking through headquarters like a man already free. He told executives there would be major leadership clarity after the gala. Lauren removed me from the rehearsal schedule. She instructed the stage manager that my microphone should remain disabled unless Adrian invited me to speak. Our production vendor forwarded the instruction to my office because Hale Group signed the contract. I told them to follow Lauren's plan until 9:15 p.m. Then accept only my authorization. We installed a parallel recording feed preserving every live microphone. Security received sealed instructions identifying which devices to collect and which exits to monitor. Independent directors met at 60 p.m. in a hotel conference room, 2 floors below the ballroom. They reviewed the evidence in silence. Some had known Adrian for years. 2 had defended him when I questioned excessive spending. 1 had repeated Lauren's narrative that I was disengaged. The audit chair presented the findings: unauthorized related party transactions, misappropriation of funds, attempted diversion of opportunities, false statements, data theft, and a concealed relationship between the chief executive and chief communications officer. David explained the ownership structure and proposed resolutions. If we act before the public statements, one director said, they will claim the evidence is retaliation for adultery. That is why we wait. Priya replied, at no zero. Adrian intends to represent that he controls assets he does not control and announce a transaction he lacks authority to make. We will hear it directly. Another director looked at me. Are you certain you want this public? They made it public? I said, I am making the record accurate. The board voted unanimously to authorize immediate action upon confirmation at the gala. The signed resolutions went into David's folder. At 6:30. Guests began arriving beneath a wall of cameras. I stood at the entrance greeting employees. People congratulated me on 10 years. Several thanked me for the educational grants or emergency funds Adrian publicly took credit for. I did not correct them. Not yet. Lauren moved through the room with a headset and a smile. Touching shoulders. Adjusting photographers. Controlling every angle. When she reached me, she kissed my cheek. You look dramatic, she said, glancing at my black gown. I thought we agreed on gray. I changed my mind. That can confuse the visual story. Then tell a better one. Her eyes searched my face. Are you upset about something? Should I be no? She smiled too quickly. Tonight is a celebration. She squeezed my hand. The engagement ring was not yet visible. She wore it on a chain beneath her dress until the announcement, I love you. She whispered, there are lies meant to conceal. There are lies meant to steal. That one tried to do both. I know, I said. She walked away satisfied. Adrian arrived 20 minutes later surrounded by reporters. He kissed my cheek without meeting my eyes. Thank you for behaving, he murmured. The evening has barely started. Let us keep it simple. You planned something complicated. He looked at me then. But a photographer called his name. The smile returned instantly. We posed together beneath the press wall. Adrian placed his hand on my waist. Lauren stood just outside the frame, directing the image of a marriage she intended to end on schedule. Dinner began at 7:30. A video narrated the history of Hale Dynamics. It opened with footage of Adrian presenting our first product, the acquisition, financing, restructuring, and patent contributions disappeared. Employees applauded. I watched my own history, reduced to background music. At our table, Margaret leaned toward me. You see how they love him? She whispered. Do not ruin this. I see exactly what they love. I said. The awards began. Engineers, designers, warehouse teams, and service employees crossed the stage. Those were the people who truly built the company. I stood for each of them. Adrian checked his phone. Lauren moved constantly between the production booth and backstage. Atop 50 shidoi. David sent one message. Board ready. Atop 50 shishase. Cybersecurity confirmed that Lauren had queued the press release and Astorvale investor deck for automatic distribution at 9:30. Atop 50 shinoa. Naomi confirmed the divorce filing had not yet been submitted. Adrian still wanted my signature before taking formal action. Authorized. The retired senator walked onto the stage carrying the Visionary Founder Award. The video wall filled with Adrian's face. 10 years ago, the senator said. One man imagined a future no one else could see. My employees applauded because they had been instructed to celebrate, not because they knew the sentence was false. Adrian stepped onto the stage. He accepted the glass sculpture, embraced the senator, and stood beneath his invented history. This company began as an idea in a small apartment, he said. It had actually begun as an acquisition negotiated in my office. But I remained seated. We had no money, no connections, only courage. I had supplied $14 million in capital and a network of lenders, but I remained seated. I risked everything. He had drawn a salary from the first day, but I remained seated. Each lie made the legal record cleaner. He thanked senior executives, investors, clients, and finally Lauren. There is one person who understood this company before the world did, he said. Lauren walked from backstage. The silver gown caught every light. She took her place beside him. My heartbeat slowed. The room seemed to narrow around the stage. Adrian looked toward me. There are moments when a leader must stop living for expectation and start living for truth. Lauren removed the chain from around her neck and slid the ring onto her finger. The cameras surged. Lauren gave me the courage to choose the life I deserve. Adrian said, "We are in love." The gasp traveled exactly as Lauren had planned. Press shutters burst. Employees turned toward me. Margaret lifted her chin as if witnessing a royal announcement. Lauren held Adrian's hand and faced the room. "This was never meant to hurt anyone," she said. "Sometimes two people discover that they have been building the same future all along." Her eyes found mine. Victoria deserves peace. And Adrian deserves a partner who stands beside him. She had written the line using language from messages I sent her about feeling unable to reach my husband. I felt the wound, but I did not give her the reaction shot. Adrian continued. "Victoria and I are divorcing. Once the settlement is complete, she will have no role in this company and no claim over what Lauren and I built." A few people applauded uncertainly. Most remained silent. Adrian mistook silence for permission. "Tonight is not only a personal beginning," he said. "It is the beginning of a new era for this business. I am pleased to announce a strategic partnership that will take our technology into a privately held global platform under leadership free from the constraints of the past." The Astorvale logo appeared behind him. As founder and controlling shareholder of Hale Dynamics, I have authorized the transfer of our adaptive interface platform into this new venture. The representative from the private equity fund looked down at his phone. Their counsel had just sent confirmation that Adrian had made the false representation publicly. I stood. Every camera moved toward me. Lauren gave a tiny signal to security. Two officers stepped closer, exactly as her production notes instructed. I looked at the digital clock above the booth. "Keep every microphone live," I told the audio director. His hand moved to the control panel. Adrian smiled from the stage. "Victoria," he said with theatrical gentleness, "please do not make this harder than it needs to be." "I agree," I said. "Facts should make it much easier." Then I walked toward him. The walk from my table to the stage took 11 seconds. I remember each one because Lauren had placed cameras along the aisle to capture my collapse. At the first step, a reporter lifted her phone. At the third, Margaret whispered something to the woman beside her. At the fifth, Adrian extended one hand, as if he planned to guide a confused wife away from danger. At the seventh, Lauren shifted closer to him, positioning the ring toward the main camera. At the ninth, the two security officers reached the edge of the stage. At the 11th, I stopped in front of Adrian and held out my hand for the microphone. He hesitated. The ballroom heard the tiny scrape of his thumb against the metal. Victoria, he said, still performing concern. We can discuss this privately. You chose the audience. A ripple moved through the room. Adrian's jaw tightened. He gave me the microphone because refusing would contradict the image of calm authority he wanted to project. I turned toward the guests. This evening was created to celebrate 10 years of Hale Dynamics. I said, it was also apparently designed to announce my divorce. My removal from a company. The transfer of technology, and an engagement funded through a research budget. Lauren's face changed. Only slightly. But I had known her for 23 years. I saw the exact moment she understood that I knew about the ring. That is a disgusting accusation. Adrian said. His microphone remained live. Do not turn a personal disappointment into an attack on this company. I am not going to attack the company. I looked toward the side entrance. I am going to let its attorney describe it. David Sinclair walked onto the stage carrying the Navy folder. Behind him came Priya Nandakumar and 2 members of the independent board. Adrian's eyes moved from one face to another. The confidence did not vanish immediately. Men like Adrian do not accept loss when it arrives. They first assume the room has misunderstood them. What is this? He demanded. David accepted the microphone from me and opened the folder. Before we continue, he said, everyone in this room should know who actually owns Hale Dynamics. The video wall changed. Lauren spun toward the production booth. Put the engagement slide back, she ordered. No one moved. She pressed the button on her headset. Control. This is Lauren. Restore my feed. The audio director removed his headset and looked at me. I nodded. The screen displayed a simple ownership chart. At the top was Hale Group Holdings. Beneath it sat Hale Dynamics, the Patent Trust, a real estate subsidiary, and 4 other companies. Hale Dynamics is not independently owned by Mr. Singh. Hale, David said. It is 82% owned by Hale Group Holdings. An entity formed 3 years before Mr. Sout. Entity formed, and Mrs. Hale married. Victoria Hale holds 68% of the voting interests in that parent company. An employee trust, early investors, and a charitable foundation hold the remainder. Mr. Adrian Hale owns 8% of Hale Dynamics invested common shares. He holds options that may, under limited conditions, increase that interest. Those options are subject to immediate forfeiture upon a finding of fraud, theft, material breach of fiduciary duty, or unauthorized competition. The ballroom went completely silent. Adrian stared at the chart as if the percentages had personally betrayed him. That is a technical structure, he said. I created the value. Everyone in this room knows I built the company. David turned one page. Corporate ownership is often technical. Mr. Hale. That is why serious executives read their agreements. A few people lowered their eyes to hide reactions. David continued. The adaptive interface platform you announced moments ago is not owned by Hale Dynamics. It is licensed to Hale Dynamics by the Hale Intellectual Property Trust. Mrs. Hale controls that trust. You do not possess authority to transfer, sublicense, pledge, or represent ownership of those assets without written approval from the Trust and Hale Group's board. The Astorvale logo remained behind us, now framed by a red notice reading Unauthorized Representation. The private equity representative stood near the center aisle. For the record, he said, our fund has executed no agreement with Mr. Pouts of Common, Hale or Astorvale. We were informed this afternoon that ownership claims were disputed. We attended to hear the proposed representation directly. Adrian's face hardened. You set me up. No. I said. I allowed you to finish your presentation. Lauren stepped forward. This is absurd. Victoria is using old legal paperwork to sabotage a strategic restructuring because she cannot accept that Adrian is leaving her. Priya accepted a second microphone. Ms. Pierce. The audit committee's concern is not your romantic relationship. The concern is whether two officers concealed that relationship while directing corporate money, data, personnel, and opportunities toward an entity they secretly controlled. Lauren recovered quickly. That was her talent. There was no concealment. Astorvale is an exploratory brand partnership. Nothing has been transferred. Then you will have no objection to the record. Priya said. The screen changed again. A timeline appeared showing the formation of Astorvale, downloads of confidential design files, meetings with employees, investor contacts, and expense transfers. These are preliminary conversations. Adrian said. Every CEO explores options. Not every CEO explores them through a competing company incorporated by his chief communications officer. Priya replied. Not every CEO tells investors he controls assets owned by a separate trust. And not every CEO bills a private affair to shareholders. Lauren's eyes flashed. Do not moralize. This is an audit. Priya said. Morality is outside the scope. Receipts are not. The first expense slide appeared. The engagement ring filled the wall in high-resolution detail, accompanied by the invoice number and accounting code prototype gemstone interface research. A low sound passed through the employees' tables. The next item was the Maldives resort invoice, labeled Asia Pacific Distributor Summit. Then the condominium lease, private dining, couture clothing, spa charges, flights, and jewelry. $628,411 in personal expenses were displayed at the bottom. Those were approved executive costs. Adrian said. By whom? Priya asked. His answer came too slowly. By my office. You approved your own expenses. Ms. Pierce submitted them. Neither of you disclosed your relationship. That is precisely the conflict under investigation. Lauren reached for Adrian's arm. He moved away without looking at her. The smallest fracture had appeared. I watched it spread. Victoria authorized generous executive benefits. Adrian said, She cannot rewrite policy because she is humiliated. Mrs. Hale did not initiate the expense review. Priya said, The independent audit committee did. After receiving evidence of potential misappropriation, the committee retained outside forensic accountants. Their findings have been provided to counsel and relevant insurers. Margaret stood in the front row. This is a family matter. She called. You are destroying a man's reputation over private spending. David looked down at her. Mrs. Margaret Hale. The 10% interest your son promised you in Astorvale does not transform a competing enterprise into a family matter. Margaret sat so quickly her chair struck the table behind her. Reporters began typing. Adrian's composure cracked. Enough, he said. Turn off the screens. He looked toward the production booth. I am the chief executive of this company. End this presentation. The audio director remained still. As of this moment, Priya said, You are still chief executive. The board will address that shortly. But this gala is contracted and paid for by Hale Group Holdings. Mrs. Hale is the controlling voting shareholder and chair of the parent company. Lauren raised her phone and began pressing the screen. I am releasing our statement, she said. People will see this for what it is, a rejected wife weaponizing corporate governance. Our cybersecurity officer appeared on the video wall from a secure operations room. Ms. Pierce, he said. Your corporate access has been placed in preservation mode. The release queue you created is locked. Any deletion. Distribution. or authentication attempt is being recorded. Lauren looked at her phone. A message appeared: account restricted. You cannot lock me out. She said, I run communications. You ran communications. I said. Her head snapped toward me. There were tears in her eyes now. But they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of lost control. You knew. She whispered. How long? Long enough to read every version of the Gala deck. The room reacted before she could Dakinasinatas. Her face became white. Adrian turned toward her. What versions? It was a production file. She said quickly. There were internal comments. Adrian proposes here. I said. Pause for cameras. Get Victoria reaction shot before security moves her. The security officers near the stage stepped backward, as if distance could separate them from the plan. Managing Victoria's emotional response. I continued. Prepare anonymous sources. Exhausted. Isolated. Controlling. Increasingly erratic. Lauren shook her head. Those are normal crisis scenarios. You know how communications planning works. I know how betrayal planning works. The screen displayed the comments exactly as written, with timestamps, usernames, and revision history. Lauren's own words towered above her. Adrian stared at the slide. You said the file was clean. It was supposed to be. You sent it to her, the wrong distribution list populated. I deleted it immediately. You told me she never opened it. She did not say anything. Their voices traveled through live microphones. No attorney could have asked for a cleaner demonstration of knowledge. David did not interrupt. Neither did I. They were doing our work for us. Lauren realized the microphones were still active and stopped speaking. Adrienne did not. This entire plan depended on you controlling the communications. He said. Do not blame me, because you could not keep one file secure. Your plan, I asked. He turned toward the audience too late. The phrase hung in the room. Lauren stared at him with open disbelief. Our plan. She said. You mean our plan? Adrian's eyes warned her. Be quiet. Do not tell me to be quiet now. She pointed at the screen. You approved every slide. You approved the reaction strategy. You wanted her provoked, so the board would think she was unstable. Adrian moved close enough that only the microphones should have heard him. Shut your mouth before you make this worse. The ballroom heard every word. I could almost see Lauren recalculating. For months? She believed she and Adrian were a unified front against me. Now she saw what alliance with a man like him meant. When pressure arrived, he would use her first and blame her second. Priya signaled for the next slide. The presentation changed to a series of messages. Lauren read the first one and stopped breathing. It was a conversation between Adrian and his private attorney, obtained from a company device through lawful preservation because the attorney represented Astorvale's corporate formation rather than Adrian's personal divorce. Adrian had written, Lauren is useful through launch pacting. Lauren is useful through launch pacting. Once the brand transfer is secure, we restructure her role. Do not put real voting equity in her name. If expenses become a problem, she submitted them and managed the codes. I can say I trusted her administrative judgment. The next message read, the affair will play badly, but the narrative is manageable. Victoria is cold. Lauren looks human. After settlement, we may not need to formalize the engagement immediately. Keep options open. Lauren looked at the ring on her hand. Then at Adrian. You said I would own 12%. Adrian said nothing. You said we were building this together. This is not the time. You told your lawyer I was useful through launch. Those were contingency discussions. You were going to blame the expenses on me. You submitted them. The answer came automatically, instinctively, and it destroyed whatever remained between them. Lauren pulled the ring from her finger. For a second, I thought she would throw it. Instead, she held it tightly enough to cut her palm. You approved every purchase, she said. You selected the account codes. Do not confess to crimes because you are emotional. Crimes. Her voice rose. You told me it was authorized. You are the chief communications officer. You had a duty to verify. And you are the CEO. Not for long. Priya said. She opened the board resolution. Adrian faced her. You cannot remove me in the middle of a gala. The board can remove you at any time consistent with the bylaws. The board has not met. 4 independent directors stood from separate tables. The 5th appeared on the screen by secure video. Priya held up the signed document. The board met at 5 o'clock this evening. Action was conditioned on confirmation of representations you intended to make tonight. Atno doisprezece p.m. You publicly identified yourself as controlling shareholder. Atno paisprezece. You claimed authority to transfer trust-owned technology. Atno șaisprezece. You announced a competing venture while serving as chief executive. The condition has been satisfied. She read each resolution slowly. Adrian Hale is suspended as chief executive officer effective immediately. All corporate authority is revoked. All devices, records, credentials, and access instruments must be surrendered. Unvested equity rights are frozen pending formal forfeiture. Lauren Pierce is terminated for cause as Chief Communications Officer. Subject to final employment procedures. Hale Group authorizes litigation against Astorvale and any participant in the unauthorized removal of corporate property. Adrian laughed. But there was no humor in it. You think signatures make you leaders. The clients follow me. The employees follow me. This brand is my name. David turned to the next page. The Hale trademarks are registered to Hale Group Holdings. Your surname does not grant personal ownership of registered marks. The company existed under that name before you became chief executive because Mrs. Hale founded the parent organization under her own family name. That fact had always irritated Adrian. Hale was my name before it was his. He adopted it professionally after our marriage because his original surname, Halpern, did not match the sleek identity Lauren designed. Over time, he behaved as though the name had originated in him. You cannot use my identity without me, he said. You signed a perpetual name and likeness agreement for corporate use in exchange for your original equity grant. David replied. Again, serious executives read their agreements. A laugh escaped from somewhere near the engineering tables. Others followed. Not cruel laughter. Disbelieving relief. Employees who had watched Adrian take credit for their work were seeing the architecture behind the performance. Adrian heard it and became dangerous. He stepped toward David. Security moved between them. Do not touch me. Adrian snapped. I own this event. No. I said. You were the guest of honor. Lauren remained frozen beside the screen. Then she looked at me. Victoria. I can explain. The sentence hurt more than the announcement. It was the same voice she used after every smaller betrayal she had helped Adrian disguise. You can explain to counsel. I said, I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to understand that he lied to me too. He did. For one heartbeat. Hope moved across her face. But he did not make you organize my pain into press categories. He did not make you sit in my kitchen and record me. He did not make you erase me from the company history. He lied to you about your reward. You lied to me about my life. Lauren's eyes filled. I loved him. And I loved both of you. The words silenced her. There was nothing dramatic left to add. Betrayal did not become smaller because the betrayer had also been deceived. Priya signaled again. The screen changed to 2 columns. On the left were messages from Adrian. On the right were messages from Lauren. The audit found that the 2 terminated officers were not only conspiring against Hale Group, she said. They were independently planning against each other. Lauren's messages to an Astorvale investor appeared. Once Adrian loses Victoria's legal protection, I control the narrative and investor access. He is charismatic but operationally dependent. Equity should vest to me if he is removed. Another message read, "Do not give Adrian sole authority over funds. He confuses visibility with value." Adrian read it with a hollow expression. "You were planning to remove me?" he asked. Lauren lifted her chin. "I was protecting myself. You called me operationally dependent. You used me. You were going to leave me with the expenses. Because you committed them. Because you instructed me." Their engagement dissolved beneath the lights before anyone had congratulated them. I did not enjoy it. Satisfaction would have required believing either of them had learned something. They were not confronting the harm they caused. They were only discovering that betrayal was not exclusive. David closed the first folder and opened a second. Mr. Hale also stated that Mrs. Hale would have nothing after the divorce except what he chose to provide. Since he made that representation publicly, counsel has authorized me to clarify. Naomi Chen walked onto the stage. Adrian saw her and looked briefly confused. He had met Naomi at our wedding. When she reviewed the prenuptial agreement drafted by his own attorneys, the parties' premarital agreement preserves all premarital business interests, including Hale Group Holdings, the Intellectual Property Trust, related appreciation, and proceeds. Naomi said. Mr. Hale insisted upon this structure because he anticipated building a substantial future fortune and wished to protect successful spouses from claims by less productive partners. The exact phrase came from his negotiation memorandum. Reporters typed faster. The agreement also waives spousal support when a spouse is terminated for fraud involving the other spouse's separate business. Corporate restitution and marital dissipation may be offset against any division of shared assets. Mr. Hale's vested shares remain subject to valuation and lawful division where applicable. His unvested options are governed by the corporate plan and the board's findings. Mrs. Hale is not seeking property that belongs to Mr. Hale. The present concern is recovering property he and Ms. Mississippi Pierce removed from companies Mrs. Hale controlled before the marriage. Adrian looked at me with naked hatred. You planned this for years. You planned the agreement. I said. I respected it. You hid the company from me. You served as its CEO. The structure was in every annual report you signed. No one reads those ownership schedules. A dozen directors and investors shifted in their chairs. Adrian heard himself and realized what he had admitted. He turned away. Lauren began scrolling through her restricted phone. I have proof he directed everything, she said. Lauren. Her attorney called from a table near the back. She ignored him. I have messages on a private cloud account. Voice notes. Drafts. He told me what to move. He told me to approach the engineers. He told me to code the expenses. Adrian laughed sharply. And you think handing over evidence makes you innocent? No, she said. For the first time that night, her voice sounded honest. I think it proves you are not making me carry this alone. She removed the phone's protective case and took out a tiny storage key. The archive is here. Our security officer approached with an evidence bag. Lauren looked at me before placing the key inside. He said you would destroy the company rather than let him go. He needed you to believe I was the danger. I believed him because I wanted what he promised. That part is yours. She nodded once. No excuse. No forgiveness. Only recognition. The evidence bag was sealed. Near the ballroom entrance, 3 people rose from a table reserved for regulatory and legal guests. One was an investigator from the State Financial Crimes Bureau. Another represented the district attorney's corporate fraud unit. The third was an attorney from the securities regulator. We had not invited them to perform an arrest for entertainment. They attended because Astorvale had solicited investment using representations about ownership, and because the audit indicated potential fraud. The financial crimes investigator approached the stage. Mr. Haile. Ms. Pierce. We would like to speak with you separately regarding the diversion of funds, removal of proprietary data, and statements made in connection with Astorvale. You are not required to answer questions here. We are requesting that you preserve and surrender specified corporate devices under the orders already served on counsel. Adrian looked at the audience. His first instinct was still image. This is a civil dispute, he said loudly. There are no criminal charges. No one stated otherwise. The investigator replied, The investigation is active. Then I am leaving. Security blocked the east exit. You may leave after surrendering company property and acknowledging receipt of the preservation order. David said, My phone is personal. It is company-owned. My laptop company-owned. The car. David glanced at the asset list. Company leased. Your driver has been instructed to return it to the fleet garage. The humiliation Adrian planned for me returned to him through ordinary administrative facts. His access badge no longer opened the backstage office. His phone displayed, Corporate access revoked. His assistant, seated near the front, removed herself from his calendar account. The people he believed followed him were not betraying him. They were obeying the organization he never owned. Margaret rushed to the stage. Victoria. Stop this, she said. Whatever Adrian did, he is your husband. He announced that he was not. You cannot throw away 15 years because of a mistake. Lauren let out a broken laugh. A mistake. Margaret turned on her. You stay out of this. You trapped him. He promised you shares. Lauren said. You knew. I knew he was unhappy. You knew about the engagement. Margaret looked toward the reporters and said nothing. Her silence answered. I faced her. The house Adrian told you he would purchase with Astorvale funds does not exist. The equity he promised you was never authorized. Do not ask me to protect you from an agreement you were willing to celebrate at my expense. Margaret's face collapsed. Not from remorse, but from the disappearance of wealth. She returned to her table without another word. Adrian came close enough for only the nearest microphones to capture his voice. But every microphone was still live. You cannot do this to me in front of everyone, he said. You chose the audience. The company will collapse without me. The company survived every decision you took credit for. It will survive finally, knowing who made them. You think people will respect you after this. They will see a bitter woman who destroyed her husband. Then they will have to ignore the documents. I loved you once. The sentence was meant as a weapon. Proof that he could still define the meaning of our past. I loved you too. I said, that is why you had access long enough to do this. It is not why you get to continue. Security asked him to step away. He resisted for 1 second. Then remembered the cameras. He straightened his jacket and tried to walk with dignity. As he reached the stairs, the investigator requested the phone. Adrian handed it over. His fingers lingered on the device, as if power might remain in the glass. Lauren followed separately. She removed her corporate badge and placed it on the table beside the ring. The ring remained hers for the moment. Although the company would later seek reimbursement, she looked back at me once. I did not look away. She left through the same east entrance she had planned to use with Adrian as his fiancé. They did not leave together. At no cinciseci și patru. The ballroom doors closed behind them. The guests remained seated in stunned silence. On the stage behind me, the Astorvale logo disappeared. The original Hale Dynamics anniversary mark returned. 10 years. Thousands of employees. Millions of products shipped. A company larger than any one man's ego, and more durable than any friendship built on secrecy. I picked up the microphone. My hands were steady. but my chest felt hollow. Tonight was supposed to celebrate 10 years of Hale Dynamics. I said, "It still will." The employees looked at me with uncertainty. Some had admired Adrian, some had believed Lauren. Some had repeated the story that I was a distant investor. They were not responsible for facts hidden from them. No company should be reduced to the ego of one executive or the betrayal of two people. I continued. The board has appointed our Chief Operating Officer, Elena Ruiz, as interim chief executive. Operations will continue. Payroll, client service, product support, and scheduled launches are secure. We have initiated an independent investigation, and its findings will be shared through appropriate channels. No employee will be punished for cooperating. Anyone with concerns may use a new outside reporting line beginning tonight. Elena stood. She had spent 9 years doing the work Adrian described in interviews as his instinct. The room rose for her. The applause began at the engineering tables, moved through operations, then reached the clients and investors. It was not applause for revenge. It was relief that the company had a future beyond the performance they had just witnessed. I thanked the employees whose names had appeared earlier on the awards screen. I asked the catering team to continue service. I invited the musicians back. The senator quietly removed the Visionary Founder Award from the stage. One of our warehouse managers raised a glass to the people who built products instead of personal brands. Laughter returned. Tentative at first, then real. The gala continued because Adrian and Lauren did not deserve the power to make their betrayal the only memory of 10 years of work. At midnight, the last reporter left. At 2:40. The ballroom staff began dismantling the press wall. At 1:15. I walked into the backstage dressing room alone. Lauren's emergency kit sat open on the counter. Makeup, tape, safety pins, printed schedules, a bottle of my preferred sparkling water. She had remembered every detail about me while planning to erase me. On the chair was the gray gown she wanted me to wear. On the table lay an old photograph from our first product launch, placed there for the anniversary video. Lauren stood behind Adrian and me, smiling with a clipboard against her chest. We looked young, exhausted, and certain that success would make us safer. I sat on the floor in my black gown and finally cried. Not because Adrian chose Lauren. By then, the man I loved had become inseparable from the person who tried to steal my work. I cried because two people had carried my memories with them into a room where they planned my public destruction. I cried for the nights Lauren held me after loss. I cried for the early years when Adrian slept beside product samples because we could not afford warehouse security. I cried because some of those memories were real even if the people inside them later became cruel. Betrayal does not retroactively erase every good moment. It makes the good moments harder to trust. David found me 20 minutes later. He did not tell me I had won. He sat in the doorway and waited until I could breathe. The press wants a statement, he said eventually. Tomorrow. The board wants to know whether you will serve as interim CEO. No. He raised an eyebrow. Elena is better at operations. I will remain chair until the transition is stable. That will disappoint everyone expecting the revenge story where you take his office. It was never his office. It belongs to the company. David smiled faintly. You sound like yourself. I am trying to remember who that is. We left the ballroom at 2:07 a.m. Outside, rain had begun. The same quiet rain that fell the night Lauren sent the wrong file. I stood beneath the hotel awning while my car arrived and understood that public truth was the easy part. The harder work would begin in the morning, when cameras were gone and every consequence needed to be documented, litigated, repaired, or survived. The next morning, every financial publication in the country carried some version of the same headline. CEO announces engagement. loses company minutes later. The wording was satisfying to strangers and useless to me. Headlines flatten complicated harm into spectacle. They did not show Elena arriving at headquarters before sunrise to reassure staff. They did not show information security collecting devices from frightened assistants who had followed Lauren's instructions without understanding the purpose. They did not show the human resources team setting up private rooms for employees who discovered their names in Astorvale recruitment files. They did not show me standing outside Adrian's office at 715 A.M., staring at the frosted glass that still carried his title. For 10 years, that room had been his theater. Photographers shot him beside prototypes developed by engineers whose names he forgot. Clients sat in leather chairs while he described negotiations I conducted. Lauren selected the books visible behind him. I entered with David, Priya, and the evidence officer. Adrian's jacket hung behind the door. A framed magazine cover called him the man who made luxury intelligent. In the desk drawer, we found handwritten notes for the gala. One line had been underlined twice. Do not let V speak until after signature. Another read tears help. Anger helps more. There was no grief in those words. No conflict. No man torn between two women. There was only strategy. He had planned my emotions as an asset to be converted. We inventoried everything. The company car key. 2 phones. Personal medication. Investor notebooks. A sealed envelope containing the revised settlement agreement. A gift box for Lauren with a second, smaller ring, and a card that read, "To the woman who finally sees me." David held the card by the edge. Evidence or trash, he asked. Evidence. I said, everything is evidence until counsel says otherwise. By 9 o'clock, Adrian arrived with 2 attorneys and demanded access. Security met him in the lobby. He could enter only the conference center under escort to collect approved personal items. Employees watched through glass walls as the man who once moved through headquarters surrounded by assistants waited for a temporary visitor badge. He saw me near the elevators. Victoria, he called. I kept walking. You owe me a conversation. I stopped. My attorney will schedule one. Do not hide behind lawyers. You hid behind a stage. His attorney touched his arm. But Adrian pulled away. You have made your point. Reinstate me while the review happens. Clients are calling. They are calling Elena. Elena cannot lead this company. The board disagrees. The board is terrified of you. The board read the evidence. His voice dropped. This company is all I have. That is not true. Yesterday you had a fiancé. A new venture. A strategic investor. And a story about freedom. The cruelty of the sentence made me feel ashamed for half a second. Then I remembered he had planned to serve me divorce papers after filming my humiliation. Consequences often sound cruel to people accustomed to avoiding them. Lauren was a mistake. He said, Astorvale was leverage. We can fix this. You announced your engagement less than 12 hours ago. I was manipulated. By the woman you promoted, funded, and planned to marry. She fed my frustration. She convinced me you were controlling me. Did she forge your approval on the expenses? He said nothing. Did she force you to tell investors you owned my patents? Silence. Did she make you prepare a settlement designed to prevent an audit? His attorney stepped between us. This conversation should end. I agree. I said. Adrian looked at me as though he still expected the private version of me to emerge. The wife who softened hard truths once no one was watching. 15 years. He said, Does that mean nothing? It means you had 15 years of access. The elevator doors opened. I entered without him. For the first time since our marriage. Adrian could not follow me into a room simply because he believed he belonged there. The first 48 hours after the gala tested whether our preparation had been real or theatrical. At 8:30 the next morning, Our largest European retailer requested an emergency call. Adrian had cultivated its chairman personally and often implied the relationship belonged to him. Their legal team had seen the clips and wanted confirmation that product licenses remained valid. Elena. David. Our licensing counsel. And I joined from a conference room without Adrian's portrait. The chairman appeared on screen with 4 advisors. We contracted based on assurances from Mr. Palsides, TERL. Highly, he said. If he lacked authority, we need to understand whether our agreements are exposed. Our counsel displayed the license chain, board approvals, and continuity certificates. Every contract was valid because Adrian had signed within delegated authority at the time. His misconduct did not retroactively destroy ordinary customer agreements. The chairman asked whether I intended to withdraw the Hale name from the product line. No, I said. The mark belongs to the company. The company is not disappearing. He looked surprised. Mr. Hale suggested the brand followed him personally. That suggestion is part of the problem under review. Elena then walked them through supply, service, and launch schedules. She answered every operational question without drama. By the end of the hour, the retailer confirmed its commitment. After the call, Elena exhaled. 1 down. How many? I asked. 32 priority accounts. We spent 2 days speaking to each one. Some clients expressed sympathy. Others wanted discounts in exchange for uncertainty. One attempted to reopen an exclusivity clause. Crisis reveals character beyond the people who caused it. We declined opportunistic demands and provided facts. Not one major client left. 3 said they had privately worried about Adrian's increasingly personal control and felt more secure under institutional governance. That feedback hurt in a different way. People had seen warning signs I dismissed because acknowledging them at home felt more dangerous than solving them at work. The employee response was more complicated. A group of sales leaders signed a letter praising Adrian's mentorship and asking the board to reconsider suspension until the investigation concluded. They were not corrupt. Adrian had promoted them, attended their weddings, and helped them close deals. To them, the man on the gala stage existed alongside a generous mentor. I refused to demand loyalty tests. We held listening sessions. Priya explained governance without disclosing protected evidence. Elena promised no retaliation for honest disagreement. Some employees resigned. Most stayed. Over time, the company learned that accountability did not require rewriting every relationship Adrian ever had as false. A person can support one employee and steal from the company in the same year. Complexity does not cancel responsibility. It only prevents us from becoming dishonest in the opposite direction. One young marketing manager requested a private meeting with me. Her name was Camille Brooks, and she had worked directly under Lauren for 18 months. She entered carrying a laptop and looked terrified. I think I helped them, she said. Lauren had instructed Camille to export press contacts and customer engagement data for an external reputation backup. Camille believed it was authorized disaster recovery. After the gala, she recognized an Astorvale folder name in one of the transfer paths. Am I going to be fired? She asked. Did you know the data was leaving the company? No. Did you receive money or an offer from Astorvale? No. Did you delete anything after the investigation began? No. Then you are going to speak with counsel. Preserve your records and tell the truth. She began crying. Lauren said you would destroy anyone who got in the way. Lauren needed employees to fear the person most likely to discover what she was doing. Camille handed over the laptop. Her records showed Lauren splitting large downloads into smaller requests to avoid alerts. That evidence helped prove intent. We did not fire Camille. We improved authorization controls and promoted her a year later after she helped rebuild ethical data practices. Punishing every person used by a powerful executive would have taught employees to hide mistakes. Accountability had to distinguish deception from obedience, knowledge from trust, and error from conspiracy. Adrian never understood those distinctions. In his public statements, everyone was either loyal or an enemy. That worldview made theft easier. If the company existed to serve him, then moving its assets felt like moving his own furniture. If employees belonged to him, recruiting them into Astorvale felt like inviting friends. If Lauren's access came from love, using her credentials felt natural. Entitlement rarely announces itself as crime. It calls itself destiny, fairness, recognition, or the correction of an old imbalance. Our task was to translate those stories back into transactions. Another immediate crisis involved the anniversary award. The retired Senator's Foundation had accepted a donation from Hale Dynamics before agreeing to present the honor. The payment was legitimate charitable support approved months earlier. But Lauren's messages suggested she viewed the donation as leverage. The foundation returned the money voluntarily and requested an independent review. We accepted the return, then redirected the amount through a transparent grant process to workforce education programs. The senator issued a statement acknowledging that the founder language had not been independently verified. That small correction mattered. Public myths grow because each participant assumes someone else checked the facts. Reporters called me constantly. One network offered a prime-time interview titled "The Wife Who Owned Everything." I declined. The title repeated a different simplification, making me a secret billionaire who defeated two foolish lovers with a folder. The truth was less glamorous and more important. I did not secretly own everything. I openly owned documented voting interests that the people closest to me chose not to respect. I did not discover a magical clause at the last second. I spent years building governance, then weeks using it carefully. David advised one controlled interview to reassure markets. We selected a business publication and required the questions to focus on company continuity. The journalist still asked, "What did it feel like to watch your husband propose to your best friend?" I answered. It felt like evidence that personal loyalty and corporate authority had been dangerously confused. She asked whether I enjoyed revealing the ownership chart. "No," I said. I would have preferred that two officers honor the duties they accepted. The interview received fewer clicks than the Gala video, but it reached directors and founders who needed the lesson. Letters began arriving from women whose husbands were the public face of jointly built businesses. Some had no idea where ownership documents were stored. Some signed voting proxies without understanding them. Some were not owners at all, despite years of unpaid labor. I could not give personal legal advice. But the pattern convinced me that clear record could become more than a temporary support project. Betrayal stories attract attention because they promise a dramatic reversal. The real reversal often begins with something boring: obtaining a copy, reading a schedule, changing an authorization, documenting a contribution, asking who has the final vote. Boring protections create the freedom to make brave choices later. The forensic review lasted 11 weeks. Each discovery showed that the Gala was not an impulsive act. Adrian and Lauren had been preparing the transfer for almost a year. Astorvale existed in draft form under two earlier names. They had approached competitors, recruited consultants, and created a private server containing product roadmaps. Lauren used her communications authority to copy unreleased designs under the pretext of preparing launch materials. Adrian directed finance staff to accelerate payments to vendors connected to Astorvale. One vendor was owned by a former colleague who returned part of each payment as consulting fees. Another provided no measurable service. Money moved from Hale Dynamics to the vendor, from the vendor to a consulting company, and from that company to the account used for the condominium and ring. It was not sophisticated. It was protected by confidence and hierarchy. Employees saw a CEO approving expenses and a chief officer coding them. They assumed authority meant legitimacy. Our audit proved how often fraud wears an expensive suit and asks people not to waste time with questions. Lauren's storage key accelerated the investigation. It contained voice notes from Adrian, screenshots, copies of deleted messages, and a spreadsheet tracking who would receive equity in Astorvale. She preserved them because she never fully trusted him. That distrust did not excuse her. It made her participation more deliberate. She knew enough to build insurance against betrayal while continuing to betray me. Her attorneys approached the district attorney within 48 hours of the gala. She offered cooperation in exchange for consideration. She admitted submitting false expenses, removing data, contacting employees, and preparing misleading press materials. She denied understanding that the patent transfer was unauthorized. The emails contradicted her. In one message, she asked Adrian whether my signature was legally required. He replied, "Technically, yes. Politically, no. Once the announcement is made and V is isolated, she will sign rather than destroy value." Lauren answered, "Then the room must believe she has already agreed." That exchange became central. It showed they were not confused about my authority. They planned to manufacture the appearance of consent, then use market pressure to force the real signature. The law does not always punish betrayal. It punishes conduct that can be defined, proven, and tied to duty or property. Their affair hurt me. Their documents created liability. Adrian's attorneys argued that Astorvale was a permitted strategic initiative and that corporate expenditures reflected broad executive discretion. They claimed Lauren's emotional involvement distorted professional judgment, but did not establish criminal intent. Then investigators found the private investor memorandum Adrian had signed. It promised that Astorvale would obtain exclusive access to Hale technology immediately after the scheduled removal of an obstructive legacy shareholder. The legacy shareholder was identified by my initials. A footnote estimated that the public engagement announcement would reduce my negotiating position by creating reputational incentives for rapid settlement. They had quantified my humiliation. They assigned a financial value to the probability that shame would make me surrender. When David showed me the memorandum, I read it once and placed it down. "Do not use the affair language in our public statement." I said, "Why?" "Because women watching this need to understand the corporate abuse, not believe the case mattered only because he slept with my friend." David nodded. Our statement focused on governance, property, employee protection, and the integrity of investor disclosures. The internet preferred the affair. We could not control that. But we could refuse to make pain the only evidence people respected. The divorce began in parallel. Adrian filed first, asking the court to preserve his executive residence, prevent me from interfering with Hale Dynamics, and award him temporary support based on the lifestyle created during the marriage. Naomi responded with the prenuptial agreement, board resolutions, audit reports, and a schedule showing that the penthouse, holding company, patent trust, and most investment accounts were separate assets. The executive residence he wanted preserved was leased by Hale Group for officers in good standing. His suspension ended eligibility. He accused me of using corporate power to make him homeless. The judge asked where he had lived during the affair. His attorney reluctantly disclosed the company condominium. That lease had also been terminated. He moved into a suite at the Legacy Club under his mother's account. 3 weeks later, Margaret learned Adrian had pledged her townhouse as support for an Astorvale credit line using a power of attorney she signed without reading. The lender did not ultimately receive a valid lien because Hale Group's counsel intervened. But the attempted transaction destroyed their relationship. Margaret called me at 6:12 one morning. "He lied to me," she said, as if the fact were newly invented. "Yes?" He said the documents were for estate planning. He said many things. "You knew he would do this." "I knew he promised you property he did not own." Her breathing was uneven. "What am I supposed to do?" Hire independent counsel. You were family. I was useful. She began crying. I felt compassion. But compassion did not require rescue. Margaret. The attorneys David recommended are qualified. Call 1. Will you testify that I did not understand? I will tell the truth about what I know. I will not invent innocence for you. She hung up. A year earlier, I would have called back. I would have paid the lawyer, explained the documents, and protected her socially. That was how systems of entitlement survive. One responsible person absorbs every consequence until everyone else mistakes her labor for natural order. I let the order change. Adrian's 8% vested interest became the main issue in the divorce. Its value was substantial, but the company asserted restitution claims exceeding part of that amount. He argued that the Gala damaged the stock and reduced his marital share, with not as really I tanned as in Newman his marital 7. Our valuation experts showed the opposite. Hale Dynamics stabilized after his removal, retained key clients, and improved margins under Elena. The market had not trusted Adrian as deeply as he believed. It trusted products, service, engineers, and contracts. By the end of the first quarter, revenue exceeded forecast. Employee retention improved. An anonymous survey revealed that many senior women felt safer speaking in meetings after Lauren and Adrian left. The company had not lost its vision. It had lost a story that confused one man with thousands of people. Adrian could not accept that. He gave interviews through friendly journalists, describing himself as the exiled founder of an empire stolen by his vindictive wife. He claimed I had used obscure legal structures to seize his life's work. Each interview forced his attorneys to issue corrections. Our filings included acquisition documents, capital records, employment agreements, and board minutes showing his exact role. The more he spoke, the more discoverable contradictions he created. In one podcast, he said he had never heard of the patent trust. Investigators then produced emails where he asked how to bypass it. In another, he claimed Astorvale was Lauren's idea. She produced voice notes of him naming the company. He accused her of seduction and manipulation. She released messages in which he pursued her for months. Their alliance became a public contest over who had been less dishonest. Neither understood that proving the other guilty did not make either innocent. Lauren wrote to me once. The letter arrived through her attorney and was marked personal, not part of settlement negotiations. I left it unopened for 3 days. Then I read it in the office that had once belonged to Adrian. She wrote 12 pages. She apologized for the affair, the recordings, the press plan, and the theft of corporate information. She described feeling invisible beside me for years. She said people entered rooms already knowing my name, while she worked behind the scenes shaping how the world saw us. Adrian made her feel chosen. He told her she was the emotional intelligence behind my success. He said I treated her like an employee even though she was my friend. Lauren wrote that she began believing she deserved a share of everything she helped present. The letter was not meaningless. It was the closest she came to explaining herself honestly. But explanation is not absolution. She did not betray me because I failed to appreciate her sufficiently. She betrayed me because she converted resentment into entitlement and intimacy into access. At the end, she wrote, I know I cannot ask for forgiveness. I only need you to know that loving him was real. I wrote one sentence in response. What you felt may have been real. What you did was still a choice. My attorney delivered it. I did not reopen the friendship. People sometimes believe forgiveness requires renewed access. It does not. I could release the daily anger without returning the keys. The criminal investigation resulted in charges 9 months after the Gala. Adrian faced counts related to wire fraud, conspiracy, theft of trade secrets, falsification of corporate records, and solicitation of investment through material misrepresentation. Lauren faced conspiracy, unauthorized access, false records, and related charges. The vendor owner and one outside consultant were also charged. The announcement arrived while I was touring our Ohio manufacturing facility. An assembly technician saw the alert first and looked at me with alarm. "Are you okay?" she asked. I considered the question. "I will be." That was the truth. Charges were not healing. They were a formal acknowledgement that the conduct existed outside my feelings. Adrian surrendered through counsel. No dramatic raid. No handcuffs beneath gala lights. He wore a navy suit and entered the courthouse through a side door while photographers shouted questions. Lauren arrived separately. The ring had been sold to repay part of the corporate loss. The gemstone prototype, as employees called it, with dark humor, recovered less than half its purchase price. At arraignment, Adrian looked at me across the courtroom. He appeared smaller without a microphone. Still, his expression carried an old demand: protect me from this. I did not. The evidence was extensive, but litigation remained uncertain. Trials are not morality plays. Records can be challenged. Intent debated. Losses disputed. Adrian's attorneys attacked Lauren's credibility and argued that she created documents to secure a better deal. Lauren's attorneys argued that Adrian possessed final authority. The government used their mutual betrayal to corroborate the independent records. Expenses matched messages. Downloads matched access logs. Investor claims matched recorded presentations. The Gala supplied public statements that no one could claim were drafted by an angry spouse. After 6 months of motions, Lauren accepted a plea agreement. She admitted conspiracy to misappropriate company property and falsification of expense records. Her cooperation reduced potential imprisonment. She received 18 months in federal custody, followed by supervised release, restitution, and a prohibition on serving as an officer of a regulated public company during supervision. Some people said the sentence was too lenient. Others said Adrian manipulated her. I said nothing publicly. The court had information I did not possess and obligations different from my pain. Lauren requested permission to apologize at sentencing. She looked toward me and said, "I took the person who trusted me most and treated her life like a campaign to win. I told myself I had earned what she built because I helped people see it. I understand now that telling the story did not make it mine. I believed she understood the sentence in that moment. Whether she would live by it was not mine to manage." Adrian continued toward trial until his former chief financial liaison agreed to testify that Adrian directed vendor payments and threatened to fire anyone who questioned them. The private equity fund produced recordings of calls. The engineering candidates produced offers using stolen designs. His attorneys advised settlement. Adrian pleaded guilty to conspiracy, wire fraud, and theft of trade secrets. The remaining charges were dismissed under the agreement. At sentencing, his lawyer described his charitable work, leadership, and the thousands of jobs created during his tenure. The prosecutor acknowledged legitimate accomplishments, but argued that success increased rather than reduced. His duty. Adrian addressed the court. He said ambition distorted his judgment. He said the collapse of his marriage left him vulnerable to bad decisions. He said he had never intended to harm employees. He did not say my name until the final sentence. "I regret that Victoria chose punishment over reconciliation," he said. Even then, he placed consequence in my hands. The judge looked at him for a long time. "Mr. Haile, your wife did not write the emails, move the funds, solicit investors, or speak at the gala on your behalf. Reconciliation was not a defense available to this court." He received 7 years and 3 months in federal prison. Restitution, forfeiture of proceeds, and restrictions on future executive service involving investor funds. His vested shares were placed into a court-supervised mechanism. After restitution, taxes, and the divorce allocation, He retained far less than the fortune he once promised Lauren. But he did not become destitute. Justice did not require pretending he had never contributed anything. It required separating lawful value from stolen value. The divorce settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. I kept the holding company, patent trust, penthouse, and premarital investments. Adrian retained the lawful remainder of his vested equity, retirement assets, personal property, and a portion of shared accounts after offsets. Neither of us paid ongoing support. The confidentiality clauses protected employee and client data, but did not erase public court records. He wanted me to agree never to describe the affair. I refused. I did agree not to monetize private, intimate material. There is a difference between owning your story and exploiting someone's most private life. The final hearing lasted 19 minutes. When the judge declared the marriage dissolved, I felt no triumph. A legal ending is surprisingly administrative. Dates. Signatures. A stamp. 15 years reduced to a docket entry. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I used the side exit and went to lunch with Naomi. We ate noodles at a small restaurant where no one knew my name. Halfway through the meal, I realized I had not checked my phone for an hour. Freedom began in moments that small part of ended. AC data. The final property connected to Astorvale was a mansion on Long Island. Adrian and Lauren had selected it as the future headquarters residence of their new leadership family. The purchase agreement was signed through an Astorvale subsidiary, endoflatter.com. The deposit came from the vendor kickback account and was partially guaranteed by Adrian's unvested options. They toured the property 3 times. Lauren created mood boards for the library. Adrian told the broker the West Terrace would host investor dinners. Margaret selected a guest room. None of them had slept there. After the audit, the funds were frozen. The seller terminated the contract. Through restitution proceedings, the recovered deposit returned to Hale Dynamics. Months later, the property came back on the market. A gossip site reported that I intended to buy it as a revenge home. I did not. I had no desire to live inside someone else's fantasy of replacing me. Hale Group later purchased a smaller property nearby for an employee leadership retreat after an independent review. We named it the Founders Center, plural, and filled the walls with photographs of engineers, operators, designers, and early employees. No portraits of Adrian. No portraits of me. Institutions grow healthier when their walls remember teams, instead of monarchs. 1 year after the gala, Hale Dynamics held its next anniversary event in the manufacturing campus courtyard. No crystal chandeliers. No celebrity presenter. Employees brought families. We projected the company timeline across the side of the factory. This time, the first image showed the acquisition team, engineers, production workers, and financing group. My name appeared in the correct place. Adrian's appeared too, president of sales, later chief executive officer. 2014 to 2025. We did not erase him. Accuracy is not revenge. It leaves no one larger or smaller than the record. Elena had become permanent CEO after a global search. Under her leadership, the company launched 2 products on schedule, renegotiated supply contracts, and expanded paid family leave. I returned to my preferred role as executive chair of the holding company. I attended investor meetings when ownership mattered and stepped away when operations belonged to professionals. For years, Adrian used my absence from magazine covers as proof that I was irrelevant. After he left, I learned visibility could be chosen without becoming identity. I spoke publicly about governance, founder control, and financial abuse within professional partnerships. I never presented myself as a woman who defeated a cheating husband. That was the most clickable version, not the most useful. I told founders to understand voting rights. licenses, option condition, and information access. I told boards that charisma was not an internal control. I told women that love did not require surrendering the ability to verify what carried their name. We established the Clear Record Initiative, providing legal and financial clinics for entrepreneurs whose intimate partners also held roles in their businesses. The first year, we assisted 87 people. Some were women. Some were men. Some were siblings or friends whose personal loyalty had blurred professional boundaries. Not every case involved fraud. Sometimes understanding the documents saved the relationship because both people finally saw the risks clearly. Other times, the documents allowed someone to leave before affection became leverage. Lauren completed her sentence and entered communications work for a small nonprofit that served formerly incarcerated women. I learned this from a public employment filing. Not from her. She did not contact me again. I hoped she built a life based on work she could honestly claim. Hope did not require reunion. Margaret sold the Legacy Club membership and downsized after legal fees. She sent a handwritten holiday card the first year. It read, "I understand now that you protected all of us for longer than we deserved." I placed it in a drawer. I did not respond. Recognition can arrive too late to rebuild a relationship. But it can still be true. Adrian wrote from prison 3 times. The first letter blamed Lauren. The second blamed ambition. The third was different. He described a financial literacy class he taught through the prison education program. He wrote that students asked why someone with so much would risk everything for more. He had no answer. Then he said, "I spent years believing the company proved I was exceptional, when I learned it did not belong to me. I tried to take it, rather than face who I was without it." I read the letter twice. It was the first time he named the emptiness beneath the theft. I did not write back. Understanding is not always an invitation. Sometimes it is simply the first honest thing a person does after the harm can no longer be reversed. My private life became quieter. I sold the penthouse because every room had been staged for a marriage that no longer existed. Not because Adrian had contaminated it, but because I wanted windows facing trees instead of towers. I bought a house outside the city with a long table, a small library, and no rooms designed for photographs. I learned to cook 3 meals well. I adopted an older dog named Milton, who distrusted everyone for exactly 2 days. I invited Elena, Priya, David, Naomi, and several old college friends to dinner. The first time laughter filled the house. I went into the kitchen and cried quietly. Not from sadness, from the realization that intimacy could exist without someone gathering material to use later. Trust returned slowly, through people who did not demand it in advance. On the 2nd anniversary of the gala, our communications team asked whether we should remove the archived video. Clips still circulated online. Adrian announcing his engagement, David opening the folder, Lauren discovering the messages. My sentence, "You chose the audience." I considered it. Then I authorized removal of the sensational edit from corporate channels while preserving the complete event in legal and historical records. The company did not need to market a human collapse. We could acknowledge the truth without turning it into entertainment. Online channels continued using the clips. I could not control the world's appetite. I could control whether my company fed it. People often asked whether I knew Adrian and Lauren would announce the engagement. Yes. Did I deliberately let them? Yes. Did that make the gala a trap? No. A trap creates conduct that would not otherwise occur. I did not write their speech. I did not form Astorvale. I did not submit the expenses. Copy the files. Recruit employees. Or plan to use my pain as leverage. I provided an uninterrupted microphone. They filled the record. That distinction mattered to me because revenge stories can teach the wrong lesson. The goal is not to become more manipulative than the people who harmed you. The goal is to stop protecting their manipulation from evidence. I did not win because I was richer, colder, or better connected. I survived because I understood the structure beneath the performance. Adrian believed being the face of the company made him its owner. Lauren believed controlling the story made the story true. Both confused access with entitlement. They saw my silence and assumed vacancy. They saw my trust and assumed weakness. They saw legal documents and assumed decoration. Most of all, they believed that because I had protected them before, I would protect them while they removed me. That was the only power I truly took away, the certainty that I would absorb the cost. There is a moment after betrayal when people around you demand immediate emotion. Confront them. Expose them. Forgive them. Leave them. Fight. Cry. The pressure to perform can become another form of control. I learned that I could pause. I could gather facts before deciding what the facts meant. I could honor grief without handing it the steering wheel. Silence is dangerous when fear imposes it. Mine came from preparation. On the night of the gala, Adrian believed the spotlight proved the company belonged to him. Lauren believed the microphone proved the room belonged to her. But ownership was never located in the light. It was in the agreements they ignored, the votes they dismissed, the patents they tried to move, the employees whose work they claimed, and the evidence they created when they thought no one with authority was listening. 2 years after the case ended, I returned to the Grand Meridian for a governance conference. I had avoided the building without consciously deciding to. The lobby smelled the same. The elevators opened onto the same corridor where reporters once waited for my reaction. A younger founder approached after my panel and asked the question people usually saved for private conversation. "How did you stay so calm?" I told her the truth. I was not calm every minute. I was calm for the minutes that required clarity. I cried in locked rooms. Woke at 3 a.m, doubted memories, and reread documents because part of me still wanted to discover an innocent explanation. Preparation did not remove pain. It gave pain a safe place to exist without controlling the decisions that protected other people. She asked whether I regretted letting the engagement announcement happen. I looked through the ballroom doors. Another company had installed a stage where ours once stood. I regret that they chose to do it. I said, I do not regret refusing to interrupt before the truth was complete. That distinction stayed with me. For years, I believed strength meant preventing disaster early enough that no one saw it. I cleaned errors before boards noticed, repaired relationships before clients complained, and translated Adrian's impulsive promises into workable plans. The skill made me valuable and invisible. At the gala, I did something different. I allowed reality to remain visible long enough for other people to recognize it. The consequences no longer depended on my private testimony. They belonged to the shared record. At the conference dinner, I sat at a table with founders who spoke openly about ownership, marriage, friendship, and power. One woman admitted her brother controlled the bank account of a company she legally owned. Another man said his romantic partner managed all employee communication without a formal role. A third founder had promised equity in text messages but never completed the grant. None of them were foolish. They were busy. Hopeful people who believed trust could substitute for structure. I told them trust and structure serve different purposes. Trust allows people to move together. Structure explains what happens when they do not. Healthy relationships can survive clear documents. Only exploitation requires confusion. Before leaving the hotel, I entered the empty ballroom. The lights were dim, and workers were setting tables for the next morning. I stood where Adrian had lifted Lauren's hand. The space held no supernatural residue. It was carpet, wiring, curtains, and rented light. The power I once associated with that stage had come from attention, not truth. Attention moved on. Truth remained in court records. Revised policies, recovered funds, and people who learned to ask better questions. I no longer needed the room to remember me correctly. I remembered myself. That was the final ownership. No document could provide. The experience also changed the way I understood friendship. I had once believed history itself created safety. That years of shared rooms, funerals, birthdays, and private jokes formed a kind of permanent moral contract. They do not. History creates knowledge. Character determines how that knowledge is used. Lauren knew me better than most people, and still chose to weaponize what she knew. Later, new friends learned far less about me, but treated every small confidence with care. Trust was not the number of years someone had stood beside me. It was the pattern of what they did when access could benefit them. I stopped rewarding familiarity with automatic authority. At work, personal closeness no longer replaced disclosures, approvals, or independent review. At home, boundaries no longer felt like accusations. The people worth keeping did not resent them. They understood that a locked door can protect everyone inside, not merely exclude someone outside. That lesson was quieter than the gala and more valuable than any courtroom result. It allowed me to build relationships that did not require blindness as proof of love. I no longer confuse forgiveness with restoration. Some people can be released from anger without being returned to the place where they caused harm. Some doors close not because hatred remains, but because wisdom finally arrived. Adrian lost the company because he confused visibility with ownership. Lauren lost our friendship because she confused intimacy with permission. And I stopped losing myself when I understood that love is not measured by how much theft you are willing to call loyalty. A company's public story should be treated as a record, not as a reward for the person with the strongest stage presence. Press profiles, anniversary videos, and honorary titles may influence perception, but they do not replace contracts, board minutes, patent records, or documented contributions. Organizations should review important historical claims, preserve earlier versions, and correct material inaccuracies before repetition turns them into accepted history. Recognition does not have to be equal, but it should be accurate, and any correction should be made through authorized records rather than by secretly altering or destroying someone else's work. Scriptwriter Nguyen Van Chien.